Writing is about the process. It's about listening and recognizing remnants of your story in the stories of others. When we share our stories with each other, we share the resonance of the human experience. The By Firelight podcast is your invitation to join our circle, a circle of writers, poets, seekers, and storytellers as we capture our living in words. This multifaceted living with joy, grief, love, growth, and loss is shared among us in your legacy, your story. The things you choose to do with your days as they unfold matter here. I'm your host, Betsy Delzer. I'm many things, but in this gathering, I'm a painter, poet, and writer, and I'm honored to be your guide through these episodes. Together, we'll find our muses in the rich and heart-expanding conversations with incredible guests, many who are like minds and all outrageously inspiring hearts. When you press play, you're here in the circle to share this space with us. By Firelight.
Shannon Algeo is an American and Irish writer based in California. He's a psychotherapist, researcher, poet, yoga nidra teacher, and co-founder of We Human and the We Human podcast, formerly Soul Feed. Shannon is the author of the books The Power in Your Hands, Liberate Yourself from Attachment to Technology, and Trust Your Truth. He's on the faculty at Esalen Institute and the Kripalu Center and leads digital liberation programs and offline retreats around the world that support people to reclaim their humanity, creativity, and attention in the digital age. He was named one of the 35 under 35 in Wellness to Watch by Wanderlust and has spoken at the United Nations and the Museum of Contemporary Art, among other prestigious organizations. Well, Shannon Algeo, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Betsy, I'm so grateful to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Wow, it's such an honor and a treat, and I'm so looking forward to our time. I always start with the question of thinking back or looking forward and thinking about your younger self, or maybe even imagining an older version of you and just kind of embodying that and imagining what he might want to share with us just as we introduce this hour together.
I love that question. Starting with my younger self and then the older self.
You could do both, or you could choose one or the other.
Yeah, I like the invitation to the younger self. That feels rich. And yeah, I'm just feeling the permission to play. And if he could say something to me, it would be, Shannon, go have fun, play, enjoy this life, enjoy nature, go ride a bike, go run around the neighborhood with friends, go imagine something, laugh. Just the invitation to remember play, which can be so challenging sometimes as we're in the thick of our adult lives. I know it can be for me.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I love that reminder as well. I will often say I spent 15 years in the classroom, and it was in particular an elementary art room. And I feel like as an adult, to have the experience of playing and being messy and being creative with little kids for that amount of time, that like filled my bucket enough to be able to be doing all the adulting I'm doing now, right?
Oh my gosh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
Connecting with children in that playful way and like seeing the world through their eyes, and that the like wonder and awe of discovery is such an invitation to, go back into that beginner's mind. And I love whenever I'm like, wait, I'm so convinced and convicted that the way I understand things and the way I know things is the way. I kind of get attached to my adult perspectives on matters. And then when I see like a friend's 3-year-olds, and I watch them looking around, and I'm just like, oh, like, wow, that wonder and awe is such a gift. And I love that about the practice of Zen Buddhism, is that invitation to Zen mind, beginner's mind. And what if we look around and don't know?
Yeah. And what happens, right, when we just sit in the presence of the wonder? It helps us tap back in, right? Especially with, I feel like we can get sort of encumbered with just the weight of things, and then we keep reminding ourselves of the weight of things. I know that's the direction we're going to go with this conversation about your most recent work and the impact of digital on our brains. But I do feel like just the purity and essence and the innocence, that's what I'm really struck by. I have friends still, even though I'm near 50, people wait to have babies these days. And I have friends who are having babies, and I get the pleasure and honor of photographing their births or being in with them sometimes, just as like friend support. We call it frula because it's a friend doula.
Oh my God, love it. A frula.
Right? A frula. It's a good thing.
We all need a frula.
Yeah. I mean, I also offer frienderator services, a decorator friend. But anyway. But it's like that moment, I'm like, this is the most pure, like, state of human existence, right? Like, just this fresh newborn life, this fresh breath, this fresh cry, this fresh connection. It's like the purest it'll ever be. It's never lost on me. Yeah. I'm really excited to talk to you for a lot of reasons. I've been following your work for quite a while, and I would just love for people to understand a little bit about who you are and what you're doing in the world. So I feel like maybe I found you in the ballpark. Would it be possible that you were kind of doing online things as much as 10 years ago? Is that?
Yeah. Soulfeed, my podcast, came out in early 2015.
Okay. Yeah.
So that tracks.
Yeah. So yeah, give us a frame, because when you go online, and I just want to say this at the top of the episode with you, you go online and read about what you're doing in the world, Shannon. It is so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
The therapeutic work that you're doing and the services that you're offering human beings in kind of just coming home to themselves, but also being a co-pilot on some of their healing. I was looking at your website and I was thinking, wow, what a stunning way to serve in this lifetime. So,
oh, thank you.
I hope that you pause plenty of times to think like, well, I'm doing this, because it's really beautiful what you're doing. So let's tell our listener, what are you up to?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for that, Betsy. That's a beautiful reflection, receiving that. I started podcasting over a decade ago, which is crazy. And I got to interview so many people who I was inspired to know and sit with and learn from and ask questions. And the interview became an art form of conversation that I loved. And that really evolved into unknowingly, that was a preparation for me to become a therapist. That through sitting with people one-on-one in therapy, which I've been doing now for the last 4 or 5 years, that is the art of conversation, the art of asking questions, the art of wondering, like we were just talking about. And yeah, so for the last 5 years, 6 years, I went back to graduate school to become a psychotherapist and to study depth psychology and marriage and family therapy and couples therapy. And I got to work in a high school. And my area of research in graduate school was our relationship to our technology, to our smartphones, and how smartphone technologies impact our solitude, our inner world, our relational field between each other, our creativity, and then also our communities and society writ large. And so I began to wonder, as I was learning about attachment theory in graduate school, it's this frame or this theory that human beings, as babies, as infants, we have this biological evolutionary impulse to attach to our primary caregiver in order to ensure safety and survival. And that attachment system continues to develop throughout childhood, early adulthood, and research shows throughout our lives. We are incredibly social beings, and we do depend on one another despite cultural norms that kind of emphasize and privilege individualism. There is no such thing as individualism in the sense that, like, the water that's running comes from somewhere, the farmers that harvest our food, the people that help us get through our days. We are such social beings, and we need each other. And so anyway, I started to study what are the links? Are there any links between attachment style, insecure or secure? People sometimes develop, a lot of people develop insecure attachment styles based on relational ruptures that happen in childhood with caregivers and also in adulthood with important relationships. And I started to wonder, am I in an attachment relationship with my phone? Because I feel like it helps me self-soothe. I feel like it helps to kind of calm me down when I'm overwhelmed, kind of wakes me up in the morning and gets me stimulated. It kind of numbs me out in bed when I'm scrolling at night. I look at it to make sure my family's okay during the pandemic. Are my parents okay? Is everyone okay? Like, I was in an attachment relationship with my phone. And as I looked deeper at the research studies that were being done in 2020, 2021, and have continued to now, I learned that there is a strong positive correlation between insecure attachment styles and compulsive smartphone use as people reach to their phones to be a surrogate secure base, a digital secure base that has an impact on our own psyches. To reach for technology more than we reach for people, that has an impact on us internally because we're attuning to the nervous system of technology rather than the nervous system of a human being.
Wow.
And that also impacts us interrelationally in our social and emotional skills as we're interacting with other people in the world. So this is a long answer, but that's been my area of research that inspired this book.
Wow. I have to believe that in kind of just peeling this all to bits and looking really at the core of what's going on, you had to probably face yourself and your own attachment and addiction first, right? And kind of experiment with, okay, do I need to reduce, change behaviors, etc.? What did that beginning look like for you?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. And I really appreciate the journalist and author Catherine Price, who wrote the book How to Break Up with Your Phone. She calls this a societal addiction, that we are all experiencing a societal addiction. So I really sat with that question of like, do I want this to be my area of research? Do I want to pick another topic? Is this really a problem? Everyone's on their phones, so it's not an addiction. Like, it's just we're all on our phones. So what's the problem here? It turns out if you take the smartphone compulsion test by Dr. David Greenfield, which is 15 yes or no questions, you would basically need to not own a smartphone in order to not qualify for having a behavioral addiction.
Wow. So every owner of a phone has some sort of addiction.
Yes. I mean, there's probably for sure some people who might not qualify, depending on their unique relationships. But yes, most of us would meet the criteria for answering yes to 9, 10, 11 of those questions. For me, it's like usually 13 or 14 yeses.
Yeah.
And so that just speaks to how normalized and invisible this behavior has become. The iPhone came out in 2007. That was the first smartphone. And since then, in the last 19, 20 years, there have been spikes and rises in anxiety, depression, suicidality, loneliness, and psychological researchers, the research lags, right? We can't measure what's happening in real time. So it's taken about 15, 20 years for the field of psychological researchers to coalesce around an understanding that yes, indeed, these spikes in mental health symptoms are connected to, maybe not completely caused by, but definitely connected to spending 5 to 8 hours every day on one's smartphone. The average person spends 61 to 80 days per year on their smartphone. That's 2 to 3 months of every year. That's 12 and a half years of one's lifetime if they live to 77. 12 and a half years on the smartphone.
Wow.
So that is weird, right? Like, that's not normal.
Right.
And if like our ancestors from 25 years ago or 50 years ago saw all of us with craned necks looking down and trying to order Uber Eats or try to like do all of these things on our phones, someone would say, "Oh, this is strange. This is weird." But it's hard to see it because we're so in it. And that's what I came up against as I was making the decision of whether I was going to choose this as a research topic. But ultimately, I knew that I was in an unhealthy relationship with my phone. I knew that I was grabbing for it too much. When I had to go to the bathroom, I'd grab my phone. When I had to do dishes, I had to be listening to a podcast. When I wanted to go on a walk, I had to bring my phone with me. Anything, when I wanted to find a partner, I was on, the dating apps looking to find someone instead of reading a book. Like it was everywhere. And so I basically chose this topic to study because I knew that it would push me to a personal edge and, in a sense, kind of force me with some external accountability to face my own addiction. And I also knew, the more that I researched this, that I'm not alone. And that perhaps by digging really deep into these topics and how they're living in my body and my psyche and affecting my relationships and my creativity, that might inspire others to become more self-reflective as well.
Whew. Okay, my brain is going in a lot of different directions because while I'm not a researcher, I do feel like I have this lifetime exposure to subjects, right? Where I'm going into schools, I'm working with middle school and high school, and the age category that I'm specifically training social and emotional learning in is between grades 5 and 12. What's interesting that I've noted is that most of our 5th and 6th graders do not have phones.
So good.
And so their problems are vastly different. Now, some people might point to, well, they're still kids, blah, 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 blah. But I am looking at it and I'm like, no, I think the problems are different because in 7th grade, that's usually the transition. It's a new school. Everybody's getting one. So everybody gets the smartphone. And then you're trying to develop this adolescent brain while having all of this input, right? So speak to I know you're going to have to kind of break down this incredible bounty of research that you've done and the insights, but what is happening to our teenagers? I mean, if I could just be so bold as to take some kind of on the road advice, what's happening for the adolescent brain as they're kind of coming into this relationship with a cell phone?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, Betsy, you're there on the ground in service and witnessing what's happening in real time. And I think just encouraging all of us to be researchers of our lives, right? Of our communities, of the people that we're serving, to going back to the beginning of this conversation, to wonder, right? To wonder. And that's one of the great losses and great threats of AI is what happens to wondering, right? When we can just ask the chatbot, the large language model, to give us a response. What happens to our own relationship to wonder? So just encouraging all of us, I think we all need to be leaders in our communities. And so I just love that you're witnessing and taking in and noticing what's happening in the middle schoolers that you're directly connected to and in service to, because we can all have such a powerful impact. And yes, so there's a chapter in the book called The Task of Adolescence, which focuses on how technology interrupts and intercepts and impacts the developmental task of adolescence. So there are 2 periods of brain development where there's the most advancement in brain activity and development. And those are in infancy, like toddler years, like 1 to 3 years old. And then the second most brain activity happens in adolescence. Dr. Mitchell Pritchfield, who is the head of the American Psychological Association, the APA, he testified before Congress in 2023 and spoke to the psychological vulnerabilities of teens that social media companies are specifically exploiting. And he testified before Congress talking about how when teen brains are developing, there is such a need for social acceptance. Like there's like this microcosm of validation, acceptance, groups. Which group are you in? Where do I belong? There's this need for like friction and learning how to navigate social conflict, understanding one's place in the group. There's a lot that's happening socially in that period of life, even without smartphones. Mm-hmm. When you add in these technologies that allow for girls and boys to have filters on their faces, group chats, Snapchat bullying, all of these different mediums that allow for like hyper levels of contact and digital groupings to form outside of the school system, then like teen brains, the way he puts it, it's all gas pedal and no brakes. Like the teen brain is thirsty for social acceptance and validation. And social media companies exploit that because it allows for this opportunity to doctor self-image, to make yourself look perfect, to kind of curate this online persona or presence. And that is really detrimental to the social emotional learning process that happens in adolescence. And if you think about it just on a very simple level, our brains developed for nearly 2 million years. The human brain has been in development to crave. The human brain craves facial expression, tone of voice, and body language. And our brains are looking for those cues to understand what is happening. How do you feel about me? Do you like me? Are we in cohesion and resonance here? Is there dissonance? When we're online, there are none of those cues. There's no facial expression. There's no tone of voice. There's no body language. And so we feel our brains are deeply dissatisfied with the interactions that are occurring online, which I think is why teens report more loneliness after being quote unquote connected via social media and online. When they're spending 5, 6, 7, 8 hours online, people report feeling more lonely after those periods, not more connected. So there's so much that needs to get sorted out in adolescence, and technology companies that are incentivized to maintain our attention for as long as possible and to do whatever it takes to keep us on the app. Teens and adolescents are particularly vulnerable. We're all vulnerable to that, especially if we have insecure attachment histories. But teens are especially vulnerable to that. And that's why you see a lot of consensus happening, political consensus, which is, rare to see political consensus. And this is one of those issues where you're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the other piece of the puzzle here that I'm thinking about in my on the ground research is that most of the parents are not what we call digital natives, right? So they're like many people, I mean, myself included, right? So if you just pull me out, and I was a younger mom. I mean, I had my daughter when I was 27 and my son when I was 30, and people are waiting a little bit longer now to have children. And I think about their own relationship to technology or their own relationship to phones. I mean, you've got a lot of Gen Xers who remember payphones, right, in the 90s. And so when you think about anywhere in the spectrum of parenting, of whether, 15 to 40 years old, and you're raising a new human in this process, and just trying to reckon with what you know about cell phones or what you know about technology. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's this thing that's happening as I'm your adult guide. I'm here to kind of bring you up in the world. And I don't have a super clear understanding of what this little box is doing to me or to you. right? And so it's therefore hard for parents to create limitations. It's even harder for schools to create policies around this. And they're trying, right? They're going as far as lawmaking, which brings up your political consensus, lawmaking around cell phone bans. And it still feels like quite a while before we're going to see, a fully clear playing field where kids they still all have them in their pockets for the most part, whether or not they're out during the school hour, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, to remember, I'm a millennial and I remember payphones. I definitely used one before, putting your quarter in the payphone and making your phone call in the phone booth. And yeah, I mean, that's such a physical embodied action, right? To step into a phone booth and to put, a certain amount of coins into the machine to dial the number that's so full of friction, right? To go find the pay booth, to open the door, close it behind you in your little booth, and to make sure you have the coins to pay the payphone and then make that call, right? There's a intentionality in that process. To make a call, you have to do something with your body. And I think that that's one of the great dangers of the frictionlessness. These companies, these apps have made our relationship so frictionless. We can just grab the phone and do whatever. I mean, we have the whole internet in the palm of our hands. So we're being flooded with so much information that is more than the human mind is capable of even processing. Johann Hari talks about it like a fire hose, and you're not able to get water because the strength of the fire hose is so strong. You're actually not getting any hydration. That's what's happening to us on a information processing level for the human brain. We can't even process. Most people can't tell you what they just saw after scrolling on their phone for 3 hours. The short-term memory is actually not becoming long-term. That there's not those connections being made in the brain that we experience, like when we're reading a book, for example. And so, yeah, it's like, I'm hearing your question, like how do we almost like bridge the divide of these worlds between digital natives and people who grew up without smartphone technology? And I love something that the social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation, talks about, which is in order to solve a collective action problem, which is what parents are facing. Parents are facing a collective action problem because if one parent says, Susie, you can't have a smartphone until you're 18, but all of her friends have smartphones, then that's a collective action problem, because in that scenario, Susie's parents are the problem rather than the whole issue that we're all experiencing, the societal addiction and the exploitation that these tech companies are applying to young developing minds. So in order to solve a collective action problem, Jonathan Haidt says, we need collective action. So one way to do that is through legislation, like consensus, making a law where we all agree, like, okay, this is harmful to teens, and so we're going to, no social media before 16, no smartphone before high school or before 16. In order to change the culture, we have to move as a group. We have to take collective action. We have to develop consensus. But we can't develop consensus if we don't have shared language. And this is where I think psychoeducation is so important, and actually knowing there are clear ways in which technology is impacting our memory, our attention span, our mental health, our attachment relationships, our empathy. Social media decreases empathy, and it exploits our negativity bias, which is why we often feel after being online like we live in an unsafe world, because we're experiencing a negativity bias towards our neighbors rather than seeing who they actually are and what their human face looks like. And so with all of this information, we do need to develop shared language so that we can have shared solutions. And if one family is the outlier in the whole community, that's not really going to work. That's just going to create a social disadvantage for that kid, right? But if all parents understand the language of this exploitation, that this is not normal, that we're raising kids on devices, that this is not normal, that we're spending 61 to 80 days per year, that's like you could go on vacation.
It's like our whole summer. It's our whole summer season. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if you add all that up, Betsy, of the human power of attention and focus, think of the solutions we could be solving. Think of the lives we could be living. So I think it's so important when we think about our power and agency in relationship to this digital world, there is something that needs to be reclaimed.
Yeah. And that's really what you are aiming to do with your book, right? So we take us from the moment you're doing this research as part of your graduate work. Do you know at that moment that this is going to turn into a book, or did that evolve a little bit later?
It was a possibility, but at the time I was like, oh God, I just got to get my thesis done so I can graduate. Like I hope I can do this on time. But once the thesis was done, and because I had written a book before, Trust Your Truth, I had gone through the process of writing and releasing a book. So I kind of knew what that was. And I realized, because our thesis was limited to about like 35 to 40 pages, which might sound like a lot, but it actually goes by really fast. And there's a lot of requirements in a graduate school master's thesis. So a lot of it was just kind of like formalities and presenting things in certain ways. So I realized when I finished the thesis that it was basically like a proof of concept of a whole body of work that I wanted to explore more of. I was like, wow, I basically just gathered all of the literature and research on this issue from all these different perspectives. My thesis was called Soul Retrieval, Poetry Therapy for Recovery of the Lost Self from Smartphone Attachment. So I looked at 3 areas: attachment theory, compulsive smartphone use or smartphone addiction, and poetry therapy, which is a model of therapy that's used in substance use treatment centers to support people in processing the emotional impacts of their addiction.
Wow. Okay.
And it's a whole field. There's a whole field of poetry therapy. And I was like, oh my God, wait, what? There's poetry therapy? Like, sign me up.
That's how I'm feeling right now. I'm like, what? I have not heard of this. That's amazing. Yeah.
It's so rich. It's a beautiful field of engaging with written poetry, reading poetry, group poetry, ritualistic poetry. It's really incredible. So I actually wrote poetry throughout my thesis process to explore my relationship to my phone. Like, could I understand my relationship to my phone by writing a poem about it and feeling the grief? And this is what started to really emerge for me, was the grief of the phantom life I wasn't living. And I started to wonder, who could I become without this weapon of mass distraction? Mm-hmm. What's the life I would be living? Who is the Shannon I would be? And that's where, going back to your question about the child self, I started to feel this ache for the inner child that wasn't playing, that wasn't making, that wasn't creating, that wasn't wondering. And I felt this pang of grief for the unlived life. And that grief that came out for me in a poem was so important because it motivated me. I was like, wait a second, this story is not over yet. I'm still alive. My heart is still beating, my lungs are still breathing, and I can do something here to reclaim the power in my hands and to choose where I place my attention and presence. And that became the motivation for the book, was okay, I have all these research ideas in one place, and I basically have done the hardest part of this, which is just understanding the framework of what needs to be discussed, mm-hmm. and the proof of concept, if you will. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to make this a book proposal. And then I got a book deal with Broadleaf Books. And then I got a job at the local public high school as an in-school therapist, which inspired the chapter about adolescence. And I could not, for me, I mean, maybe other people can do this, but I could not work in a high school as a teen mental health therapist and author a book, steward a writing process at that time. So I actually delayed the whole book writing process by a full year. Thank you to my publishing company for your understanding, compassion, and grace. And now, yeah, I wrote the book last year, and now it comes out in June.
Wow. How different was... So the book's title is The Power in Your Hands, Liberate Yourself from Attachment to Technology. I love that. How different was that process of The Power in Your Hands compared to your first book writing process? So, like, was it sort of similar, or did it feel like the second book kind of came because you had all this research done? Like, was the process itself similar or different?
It was so different. The Power in Your Hands is the book I just wrote. Trust Your Truth came out in 2021. And so at the end of 2019, I was moving to Topanga Canyon, which is in the Santa Monica Mountains next to Malibu. And it's this kind of hippie, kind of rugged mountain town in Los Angeles. And I moved there up in the mountains with like bobcats and coyotes and mountain lions, peacocks, just to write the book. And I like really slowed down my life, and I had the privilege and the support at the time to slow things down a bit so that I could focus on the writing process. And it was really slow, and there was lots of solitude and devotion to the writing process through connecting to nature and myself and kind of going inward and being alone. And that was beautiful. And with this book, I literally was like, I have to get out of my life in California. I have to get out of this like therapy licensure process. I have to get out of this high school. I feel like I'm back in high school here. I have to go. And I attended this artist residency in France called Fatopia. And I wrote there. I wrote in the Netherlands. I wrote in Ireland. And like this process was so messy. I like delayed the whole project by a year. I like took my body to Europe with no return flight. I lived in all these different cities and environments, and I would stay places for about like 4 to 5 weeks. So I wasn't like bopping around day to day. I was definitely like settling in. But the 3 sections of the book, reckoning, remembering, and reclaiming, strangely corresponded with the Netherlands, France, and Ireland. And it's like each section of the book was in relationship to the place and the community and the ecology of where I was. And that was amazing. And ultimately, the essence of it is so much of what I was exploring in this book was attachment and relationship to community, and wondering, how can I be a part of a community that can help hold me as I face this addiction to my phone, as I face this attachment to my phone? Can I rely more on people? Can I feel the web of the collective and relationships and really be with people as I write this book? And that was very different than the first book. I was like, I need to get away from people. And the second book, I was like, I want like campfires and like sauna sessions and like artist residencies. And yeah, so it was quite a different process, and they both were really rewarding. And just the last thing I'll say is that this book, The Power in Your Hands, was a messy process. And there was great significance for me as an artist to let myself be messy.
Yeah.
To not try and write the perfect thing, but like get a shitty first draft out there. Mm-hmm. I was trying to really work with my muse, and this is a messy issue and a heavy topic, and it's complicated. And I was wondering, like, how do I get free from the phone-based life? How do I deal with the digitization of my psyche? Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what you think about this, Betsy, with being in the work of like writing and creativity. With every project, I feel like there's something that it's asking of me, and there's like a channel through which it wants to come through. And something about surrendering and going to Europe was a really big part of allowing this book to come through. And I can't really explain it. There's a kind of a mystery to it.
Well, yeah. And I'm curious for you, like you were asking the question, can I like write this book in community, or can I do this differently? Was the answer, I mean, clearly it was yes, right? Like you were able to ground in those 4 to 5 week stints in places and connect with people. There must have been also an enlivening about that process, right? Like something that really kind of made you feel on the cusp of like real aliveness. I think sometimes our regular rhythms and routines can bury that pretty deeply. And travel, the stamps in the passport, the new fresh faces, the opportunity to just show up and be essentially you versus all the multifaceted, ways that people perceive us in our everyday lives. So was the answer yes in terms of your experiment of writing in kind of different places and spaces?
Yes, it definitely was energizing and enlivening and emergent. Like the book was emerging, and there's a lot in the book about the places that I am, where I'm writing. There's a deep process with the nature and the wildness and the wisdom of Irish land. And when I was at the residency in France, there was this 1 week where I was really just starting to get going with my writing process. And the Global AI Summit in Paris descended upon the chateau after the summit ended, and like 50, 60 people who were talking about LLM and data encryption and digital ethics started to they were everywhere, all over the chateau. Like the hollowed halls of this 1600s castle were like just voices talking about tech. And I was so pissed because I was like, I don't want to be talking about this. I don't want to be hearing about this. I want to write my book. And there's a chapter called AI and the Self that's all about that process of me reckoning with what's it like to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you or have a different perspective or are seeing more of an opportunity in this moment from a creative standpoint. They're creatively inspired by AI. So it really pressed up against my creative process. In a sense, it was distracting. I needed to learn to write without perfect conditions. Throughout all of these journeys, I needed to write anyway. And so this was a really good opportunity for me to realize oh, wow, there can be what do you actually need to sit down and write for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours? Do you actually need perfect stillness and no one around and to be in a mountain at the peak with just surrounded by bobcats and peacocks? Is that what you need? Or could you actually, Shannon, and this was my ritual, when I wrote, I turned off my phone, I put a sticky note on the back, and I clocked the end time of my writing session. And then I signed the back of the sticky note with my initials. And then I would put my phone in a drawer in another room, close the drawer, close the door to that room, and then go into my own room, my writing room. And so I turned this writing time into a ritual of turning the phone off, making a pact with myself, like my signature on the line, and then creating friction, right, by the phone being in another room. And research shows this as well. When the phone's in the other room, people are less distracted than when it's in their pocket or on the desk, which makes sense. And that process of creating so much friction with my phone and creating a ritual around it of meaning, like this is my writing time, that was more of the distraction. And that's the thing, is like I could be anywhere in the world. I could be in Ireland, anywhere in Europe. I could be in California. I could be in Madison, Wisconsin. But when that phone is with me, I'm not alone. There is no solitude. There is no aloneness. I can get every person far away from me, and yet there I am in the room with my phone, and the whole world has access to me, and my brain has access to all of these ideas and information and distractions that aren't my creative project and my creative purpose and my wondering. So this trip to Europe kind of was like surrendering to like, give me the world's noise. Give me real noise. Give me real embodied distractions. Give me like the bottle of French red wine after dinner that is, distracting me because I want to have all these cool conversations by the fire with fun people. Give me that. That's real. And how can that help me manage this like delusional device that's the real distraction from my creative process? That's kind of how it lived for me.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like we could spend hours together because there's so many different directions and so much like insight that I feel like you could shed for so many people listening here. I'm thinking, I guess, about your pulling the highlights from reckoning, remembering, and reclaiming, and wondering about what are you really excited? June 2nd, this book comes out and we can hold it in our hands and share some of this journey with you. What do you hope that somebody who's maybe feels a little tentative, I'm not going to lie, I think some of the feelings of like, oh, do I really want to learn about the anxious generation? Do I really want to learn how bad this is for me? Right? Do I really want to learn about that? I mean, there's like some hesitation there with just about pick any topic, it's like alcohol is a good one, right? Like there's a reason I kind of like steer away from Quitlet, and yet I'm 200 plus days into this like sober school year experiment for the purpose of just being curious. Like what happens when I remove this from my social setting, when I remove this? But I would say like there's also a level of hesitation in exploring all the information about what this means for my lifestyle. And I think that there are some things that are parallel as I'm listening to you about the exploration of digital impacts on my brain. So as you imagine somebody holding the book and thinking about your kind of 3 pillars of how you wrote this for us, what is something that could make us maybe feel a little less afraid of exploring and more empowered to really see that the power is in our hands?
Yeah, I love that inquiry. And that's really why the 3 sections exist: reckoning, remembering, and reclaiming. Because I mean, Johann Hari wrote Stolen Focus. Like, go read Stolen Focus. It is incredible, an incredible synthesis and case about what is happening to our bodies and brains in relationship to technology. Read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It's an incredible resource, especially if you're a parent and if you're anyone who's impacted by technology. I wanted The Power in Your Hands to be both a reckoning. It was really important that the book include the scope of the problem as researchers see it, as I see it. And I didn't want to stop there. I wanted to go into the remembering. And that's the section of the book that I think readers will really delight in. I talk about that section as more of like an album of music. And each chapter is like a portal into a different medicine, a different way of re-engaging with life and with the built world and with creativity. So there's chapters like poetry therapy to explore the power of the poem, to explore your relationship to technology in a non-judgmental and just kind of curious way. There's a chapter called Into the Woods, A Walk to Remember, where I invite everyone to go on a sensory walk in the wild, noticing the 5 senses and engaging with the natural world. Eventually, the challenge is to do that walk without your phone. And there's chapters like Reignite the Artistic Spark, where everyone goes and kind of explores how to advocate for the inner child by choosing a creative project or creative inquiry that can support getting offline, right? Like the power is in your hands. So this isn't just about what's wrong with our culture or what's wrong with our relationships with our phones. This is about finding where are the pathways of agency. For me, it is motivating to kind of like feel the ache of the problem, but I don't think it's helpful to get stuck in despair, because then we're just in action and nothing changes. And so the remembering section is like exploring interpersonal neurobiology, like Dan Siegel's work that merges attachment theory and mindfulness and neuroscience, and getting into like different relational exercises, creative projects, nature, poetry. And I know there's more that I can't even remember right now, but that whole section is these little like micro doses of getting offline to get free. And that really is the attention, is to like liberate ourselves from attachment to technology through tiny micro experiments, because we know what works best for transformation and change is to have new experiences. So we can't just understand the problem. I have done so much research on this problem, and I have watched myself just as addicted to my smartphone. Like, knowing things does not change things. It can help prepare for change, for sure. But the best, most effective way to make a change, is to do something different with our bodies, to do a day out of time, which is this 36-hour no technology portal that I invite people into in the book. Or do a date with yourself where you go to a restaurant alone, or you could also go with a friend, but go to a restaurant alone with no technology and just be there. And then reclaiming kind of like weaves in some more practical, like, here's how we can get offline. Like, here's how to make sure that if you're reading this book, you're like actually implementing some changes and you're not just a passive reader, but you're like putting it into practice. And that's where the reclaiming section comes in, kind of clarifying, like, what are your values? What is important to you? What do you believe? And how can you actually like go forward and make decisions from your value system rather than from the cultural addiction that's being placed upon us?
Wow. I think it's going to be just a profound gift. And really, when I think about, I'm excited to read it, I'm thinking about, the excitement and sharing with other parents, but also with my school community. Is the hope that you have, because it's a hard and heavy topic, and I would imagine writing about it for as long as you did and studying it for as long as you did, you had to find, like, how do I find these micro experiences that spark hope? Is the hope that you have that you help people realize I'm still alive, like kind of that moment that you had where you're like, I'm still here, I'm still alive, I don't want to lose my years to this box and this. Is that kind of the hope that is coming along with the gift of this book?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is the driving heartbeat of the book for me. That's why I wrote it. I wrote this book selfishly because I was wondering, can I get free? Can I be in relationship with my creativity? Can I create? Can I write? Can I choose where I place my attention? And so the hope and the invitation is that we are all here and we're alive. And while this is a problem that impacts all of us uniquely, we're in this together, and we can make choices that allow us to go in the direction of our dreams. I love the quote by Mary Oliver from her poem, The Summer Day. The question she asks, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? What will you do with your one wild and precious life? And that question has been like a North Star for me in relationship to how technology impacts my relationship to myself. It's crazy because I don't use a smartphone now. I have one, but it's off all the time. I use a light phone, which is this like high-tech non-smartphone developed by a company called the Light Phone. And it's amazing. But what I notice now is when I do go on social media, when I go on Instagram, I like instantly have FOMO and like jealousy and am comparing myself to other people. I'm like, oh gosh, like I should be doing that. Oh gosh, like I'm not doing enough of that. I should. It's crazy. It's really wild to watch how quickly I go into that like comparison brain. Whereas like when I'm just in my life, I'm like happy most of the time to be in my life and proud of myself for the ways that I'm showing up and feel good about kind of where I am and how I'm orienting. And so that's also the hope, is that I hope that people do something different, like do an experiment of some kind to decouple from this intimate relationship that we have with technology, that you have with technology, most likely. And through that decoupling, there's an insight that comes forward like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I wasn't aware of, I mean, for example, like the 36 hours of what's called a day out of time. Those days to me are like psychedelic journeys. They're so long. Like the time expands and I just am like on the couch reading a book. I feel like so excited when someone's knocking on the door. I'm like, oh my gosh, like who's here? There's just like my entire nervous system attunes to the circadian rhythm of the day, the sunlight, like noticing the sun, like, oh, I wonder what time it is. Because part of a day out of time is you can cover your clock. So you're actually completely in relationship with the natural rhythm of the day. And so, yeah, I really do hope that people can feel inspired to create, that they have something meaningful inside of them that could come out, and that there's an experience that is yet to be had, and that experience is actually like deeply familiar to our ancestral bodies, like the wisdom in the cells of our bodies, that our ancestors knew a different way of living, and we can remember that too.
You know what visual is coming to mind, Shannon, is the videos of babies when they're given either like hearing devices or glasses for the first time, and they are all of a sudden experiencing world at a totally different saturation level. Right? Like they're just like the sound is all of a sudden different, or just the picture that I can see in my mind is just the glasses going on and all of a sudden things becoming clear and seeing faces, seeing things. And that's what I think this work of art of yours is going to do, is just give us that opportunity to hear, to see, and potentially just to be more saturated in our lived experience versus kind of numbed out behind layers of screens. So I've loved this hour. I love our time together. Thank you so much. One thing I like to offer just at the end is if there's anything still yet to be said or anything that we didn't touch on, we'll of course link everything in the show notes of how people can find this book as soon as it's available and before, for a little pre-order love, and also how to find you because you're such a bright shining light. But is there anything else you'd want to say?
Oh, thank you so much, Betsy. I'm just grateful to have had this conversation with you and to get to share about the book and the writing process and creativity and reclaiming our attention and our presence. And I think I just invite everyone who's here listening to breathe into the belly and remember that this work ultimately is about embodiment and like how do our bodies respond to the speed of technology, right? Our nervous systems attune. We're such social relational beings. And so there's a somatic response that we have to technology. And for me, I often notice like that there's a bit of a tension there, or holding or a gripping or a quickening. And I think that that can just be a powerful, practical invitation for all of us is like, can we actually feel what's happening in our bodies and breathe a little bit deeper into our bellies? Notice how technology impacts the way that you breathe. I notice my breathing can get so shallow when I'm on my phone or computer for too long. And I really do think our bodies can invite us back to the built world. They can. Our bodies can invite us back to the built world. And that can also be uncomfortable because the built world can be really hard sometimes. And so I like to say I am not anti-technology. I'm pro-human. And that does require that we nurture and protect what makes us human. And so I just want to thank everyone who's joined in this conversation for this rehumanization effort that we're all a part of through this inquiry of how technology shows up in our lives.
Thank you for leading us, for teaching us, and just giving us the opportunity to learn at the pace that we need to with all the heart that you bring. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Thank you to everyone listening.
By Firelight is a Lit Path Studios production and is produced by Jamie Gale and Betsy Delzer. Music is by Legito Music and Pond 5. Thank you for being a part of our beautiful collection of stories.